sponsored by Squarespace. You're on the battlefield to liberate Europe, and suddenly you see a ball. But this is no ordinary ball, it's a tank. Your squad opens fire, but it's already too late. You've been spotted, and the spherical tank has already made its retreat. Your position has been compromised. Now, I know what you're thinking. This thing seems too outlandish and is probably one of those cursed concepts that never left the drawing board. Just like the hopping tanks. Yeah, let's never talk about the hopping tanks again. But what if I told you that this vehicle was actually made? Captured by the Soviets after World War II, this tumbling ball of weirdness raised more questions than it answered. Who made it? And what was its intended purpose? Was it simply a relic of the past, or a wonder waffle that would revolutionize squad tactics and turn the tide of war in the Nazis' favor? Today on Found and Explained, I want to explore all the crazy theories surrounding this sphere tank. This is the mystery of the Nazi ball tank, the Kugelpanzer. This vehicle remains one of the biggest mysteries that we've ever covered on the channel. There is virtually no documentation that covers its true purpose and development, and only one was ever discovered, so we can only speculate and draw our own conclusions. But the fact that one was discovered means that this wasn't just some paper project. What we can say for certain that this isn't the first spherical tank design ever done in history. During World War I, there were many attempts to overcome the horrors of trench warfare by finding ways to protect troops and give them the means of assaulting enemy bunkers. This, of course, led to the discovery of the tank as we know it today. However, engineers from around the world were playing with many other different designs. After Britain introduced their Mark I, the German Ministry of War had to respond, and they had private companies come up with several different designs. Hansa Lloyd created the Trefas wagon, and only one prototype was built. It featured two huge wheels about 3 meters in diameter and a fighting compartment which extended like a tail. At the end of the tail, there was to be a wheel which would allow it to turn, just like a reverse tricycle. It was armed with 2 AT guns capable of penetrating the Mark I armor and would fit 4 crew members, a gunner, loader commander, and a driver. However, the tank could not absorb the recoil of the main weapon, and the gunner would actually get hurt after a few shots. It was also prone to rolling over when going over trenches and getting stuck in deep mud. After the war, an inventor from Texas, A.J. Richardson, came up with the Tumbleweed tank. This looks a lot similar to the vehicle that we're covering today. It featured 2 rotating outer shells in the form of cup-shaped halves. Motor-driven gears rotated the 2 outer shells, which rolled the tank along the ground. The speed of each shell affected the steering of the vehicle. Slowing down the left would make it turn to the left. The weight of the engine would keep the tank from rolling over. It featured 3 crew members and was resistant to gas attacks, a big problem during World War I. Hilariously, however, Richardson forgot to include any means for the crew to actually see outside, and thus the entire idea was never put into practice, so this thing remained only a drawing on paper. But as you already know, the Nazis had to have their own attempt at this crazy concept. Germany in World War II cooked up some pretty crazy ideas, like the giant railway, kamikaze planes, and even a Nazi space shuttle, all of which are on the channel right now and you can watch. But it's the Nazi ball tanks that I find to be the most mysterious. It makes me wonder that instead of using files and documents for this project that get lost over time and leave us in such a dark mystery, the engineers would have been better to build a website using Squarespace. That's right, using the new Fluid engine at Squarespace, they could have built an amazing website using the impressive drag and drop technology, automatically building a website for both mobile and desktop. And Squarespace is so damn good at making websites that it actually allows me to show you a preview of the next video right here, as I tell you that there are hundreds of templates to choose from, plus ones that have an online store already set up for you. All you have to do is just add products, or others that can launch a business idea in an instant. In fact, Squarespace is the exact thing that I use for my own store, foundandexplained.shop, for all your cool merch. But not only do I have a preview for the next episode of Found and Explained, I can also give you 10% off your first site and domain at www.squarespace.com/found. And anyone that clicks the link gets my gratitude and thanks for making everything you watch today quite possible. The only remaining Kugelpanzer today is on display at the Tank Museum in Moscow, so we at least know what it looks like. Well, sort of. We can see that it features similar rotating shells as the Tumbleweed tank and a tail used for steering like that on the Trefus wagon. However, this was a one-man vehicle and we can see a slit for the driver. There was speculation that it was also supposed to be armed with a light machine gun, which was to be used through this weld you can see here, but we can't know this for certain. On the back, there was a hatch used for entering and exiting the vehicle, although we can't imagine how comfortable it would have been to use. The engine would have probably been a single-cylinder 2-stroke engine, which speculated to have been able to push the two hemispheres and get this tank moving at a, well, 8 kilometers per hour top speed. But again, this is mostly speculation. The Soviets took out the exhaust engine and transmission, and there are no surviving records on how these systems worked. To this day, they remain very secretive about the inner workings of this sphere tank, and you kind of wonder, were the Soviets actually planning to produce their own versions? Now, the armor itself was only 5mm thick, which would have protected it from small arms fire and maybe some machine gun rounds, but this spherical tank would have been a giant target for anti-tank weapons or heavy machine gun rounds, but we'll get to that later. Now, one of the other big mysteries about this tank was where exactly it was found. Some reports state that this vehicle was recovered from Kummelsdorf, the infamous proving ground for Nazi weapon projects during the war. It's possible that it was developed and tested along other advanced tanks such as the Tiger II and the Huge Mouse. However, most other sources indicate that it was captured in Manchuria from, believe it or not, the Japanese. This wouldn't have been strange at all, as Japan and Germany did share resources and technological ideas. So with this in mind, let's look into some wild theories about how this tank, if I can even call it a tank, would have been implemented. The biggest problem that we face when trying to determine what this weapon was used for is, in fact, we have no idea when it was designed. It's quite possible that, like the Tumbleweed and the Trefus wagon, this is simply an old design from World War I and not designed for the conflicts after 1939. With its speculated top speed and light armor, this vehicle certainly wouldn't be something that the Nazis would want to use in a blitzkrieg, and would have made a subpar fire support vehicle. If we go with a theory that it was found at the Nazi proving grounds, then it's certainly possible that it was just left there long before the war had even started. However, there's also a couple of other ideas where it could have been used in World War II. Many speculate that it would have made a great scouting or spotting vehicle. This is literally what it says on the information plaque in the museum in Russia. The driver would have been able to observe targets such as enemy artillery or mortars from a distance, all while maintaining a lower silhouette than a larger heavy tank. It would have also been a useful vehicle for cable laying, perhaps towing cables whilst offering some degree of protection for the driver. Things get even more interesting if we go into the more widely accepted reports that it was found in Manchuria. Now, some say that it was intended to be used as a suicide vehicle by the Japanese and allow for ground kamikaze attacks. The vehicle would be filled with explosives and sent out to enemy positions. However, this is probably not the case. You see, the kamikaze, at least those airborne ones, would at first only crash into the enemy if they were seriously damaged. During the later stages of the war, the Japanese command started actually ordering them to crash into the enemy as they were running out of ways to stop the Allied forces. But these were the later stages of the war. It was very unlikely that Germany would be able to ship this tank specifically at that time due to the fact that German U-boat trips to Japan had become much rarer towards the end. Another possibility is that the Germans simply had no use for the design, so they sent it to Japan for research. And finally, there is a possibility that the entire thing is a complete hoax. The Soviets were certainly known for their propaganda, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility that they were the ones behind the Kugelpanzer, or they simply found an incomplete discarded Nazi prototype and presented it as a thing that would give the Soviet Union an edge in next-gen tank warfare, particularly against any visiting Americans who may have come to look at their facilities. Evidence that supports this theory is the fact that the Nazis were known to document most of their projects. In fact, I've covered a whole slew of UFO topics here on the channel that actually have Nazi documentation and project numbers. And so it's highly unlikely that we wouldn't at least have some documentation regarding the development of this mystery vehicle, which doesn't appear in any Nazi records. In addition, the museum remains secretive, and apparently they refused foreign researchers from examining the tank in more detail. So, what's the real story? Is this a Nazi superweapon that could have prevented the Allies from retaking Europe? Or is it a hoax developed by the Soviet Union with some old machine parts from a discarded prototype? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments.